Hello, and welcome to today's session on financial strategies for 1Ls. My name is Zachary Smith, and I'm a regional director with Access Lex Institute, and I'm Baylor University's primary point of contact for the Max by Access Lex personal finance program. If you have never heard of Access Lex before, that is completely okay. You're going to hear our name a couple of times throughout the course of law school. We are the nation's largest legal education nonprofit. Mission is empowering the next generation of lawyers, and my team does that in particular by educating law students around their personal finances to make sure that law school is as affordable and as accessible as possible for everybody who is wanting a legal education. Now, I mentioned at the top that everything today is coming from Max by Access Lex. This is the personal finance program for law students. All things Max, including webinars like this one, including online Max lessons and individualized personal coaching with accredited financial counselors, is accessible through Ask Edna, the education network at Access Lex. So this is actually where you'll go to sign up for Max. This is where you'll go to log in to access all things Max. You can access Ask Edna at askedna.org or through that QR code on the screen as well. I'll go ahead and leave this up for a couple of seconds just to give anybody the chance to scan that QR code or to copy that URL listed there at the bottom of the screen. Because we'll be talking about our personal finances today, it is important that we issue a quick disclaimer. All information provided in the session is for educational purposes only and is not intended as investment, tax, or legal advice. You should always consider whether the information is appropriate for your unique needs and, where applicable, seek individualized advice from a professional advisor. Now, let's go ahead and dive into financial strategies for 1Ls. So as we're getting started, I want you to think about how you're feeling about money coming into law school, anything that is stressing you out, and what is the money issue right now that feels most relevant to you? Is it maybe figuring out what types of student loans to borrow, or whether or not to borrow any student loans? It might be navigating the financial aid process and figuring out how I'm going to get that financial aid refund. And then once I have that cash in hand, how am I going to use it to pay for things like rent and groceries? Maybe it is thinking through credit. Maybe you are trying to apply for some private student loans that are credit based, and you're needing to think through how can I get my credit into a better place? Or maybe you've got your funding plan for law school pretty well figured out, but you're concerned about some of those big expenses that come up towards the end of law school around getting ready for the bar exam and all of those costs. Of course, this is not an exhaustive list, so there may be plenty of other things that you might be thinking through that may affect how you're feeling about money coming into the law school process. So right here at the top, just want you to take a quick second, think through anything that might be stressing you out financially, and hopefully we're going to be able to address some of those things through today's session and get you some next steps that you might be able to take to prevent the stress from really spiraling out of control and taking over your 1L year. Hopefully we can get you to that spot where you're feeling good enough to be able to move forward with the 1L process. Okay. So why do we really need to think about our personal finances for law school, and why is it important that we start thinking about it early? Well, very similar to purchasing a car, it is very rare that the sticker price of law school or the school's cost of attendance is going to reflect our exact expenses for law school. So we may not pay exact sticker price. Our expenses may not line up with the school's cost of attendance exactly. So those are things that we want to think through. If we can make law school slightly cheaper than the school's cost of attendance, we might not have to borrow student loans to cover the full cost of attendance. That allows us to keep our borrowing lower and keep those student loan repayment and management process after law school a little bit cheaper, maybe a little bit less stressful for us. We can also run into plenty of hidden costs throughout the process of law school, whether that is an emergency that comes up or maybe just costs that we weren't aware were going to come up during the process. We know that a lot of the stress around money in law school is not necessarily just about the total amount of money that we need, but oftentimes it is brought up around the timing that we're going to be receiving that money. So we often are going to have a couple different uh, financial aid disbursements throughout the year, and depending on when those fall, it could create some cash flow issues around timing for us. So we want to be aware of when those disbursements are going to be ahead of time so that we're able to plan around those expenses and the cash that we're going to use to pay for those expenses. And we also know that student loan borrowing and the amount of student loans that you take, your financial well-being after we have graduated as well. We've done a good amount of research with the ABA Young Lawyers Division around how student loans affect recent law school graduates, and it can be pretty significant. So the earlier we can start planning for some of these things, the more that we're going to be able to reduce our stress. And the goal today is to give you some concrete strategies to make sure that you're setting yourself up for success. So this is where we're headed today. We've got some strategies that are going to be really helpful early on in the law school process. These are absolutely things we can do early on in 1L year. If we're able to do some of these things before we step foot on campus, that's great. But if we're starting the process now, it is not too late. We can still run through some of these strategies. There are going to be some additional strategies that are going to be helpful to us during the 1L year process. And then there's some things that we need to start thinking ahead for. And so we're going to dive into each one of these topics in a little bit more detail. So strategies for incoming 1Ls. So early on in the process, what are some things that we need to be thinking through? One of the biggest things is going to be determining our funding gaps. So figuring out between our available financial aid, maybe some of the available funding we have coming into the process, what are our additional funding needs and how are we going to fill those additional funding needs? Once we know roughly how much money we're going to need, that is when we start breaking that down into our spending plan or into our budget. How are we going to control our spending so that we're keeping our spending within the amount that we already kind of designated that we think we're going to need? And then we always want to have an eye on the future and be thinking a couple of steps ahead. Okay, I'm good for 1L year, but what is the summer between 1L and 2L year going to look like? Am I going to have some additional money? Maybe I can reduce the amount of borrowing that I need to do in 2L year through some creative financial management in 1L year and things like that. So we always want to be looking ahead, always want to be reevaluating, okay, what are my funding gaps? And building that into some sort of spending plan or some sort of budget. Now, I've used the term funding gaps a couple of times. Let's go ahead and redefine that define that real quick. A funding gap is basically just the difference between all of our direct costs for law school, so tuition and fees going to the school, what I'm realistically going to need to pay for my living expenses, and then any money I need on hand for those hidden costs. Again, whether that's an emergency or whether those are those bar exam costs that come up towards the end of law school. So I need a certain amount of money to be able to cover all of these things. Then I may be offered a scholarship to Baylor. I may be awarded some grant funding, probably a small amount of grant funding. I might be coming into the process with some personal savings or an education savings account like a 529 account. I may be able to work part-time, probably not during the first semester of 1L year, but maybe during that second semester, during 2L and 3L year. And then I may have access to some loan funding. Now, if any of these things or a total of these things are not completely covering our costs, that is what that funding gap is. And so we may need to think about, okay, how do I get creative with my federal loan eligibility Do I need to think about borrowing a private student loan, or will my federal loans cover this funding gap between what my actual expenses are going to be and then what my actual financial need is going to be? Now, the more of the expenses during law school that we can cover with free money or money that we don't have to pay back, that is going to set us up for success. And if you are wanting to find third-party scholarships for law school, there's really no better place on the internet than the Access Lex Law School Scholarship Data Bank. There are always about 700 to 800 different scholarship opportunities out here, whether it's a scholarship competition, writing competition. There are even things like bar study scholarships and things out here as well. So this is a great resource to bookmark and revisit at least once a semester, just to see if there's anything new out here that you might be able to apply for, or maybe something that's opened back up that you may be able to apply for in terms of scholarship funding. Okay. Now, we talked about free money, money that we don't have to pay back. Let's talk about your loan options real quick because these have changed starting with the 2026-2027 academic year. Under federal student loans, we used to have changes. There were changes made to the annual amounts that we can borrow in that loan type and the lifetime or aggregate limits that we will have on these loan types. We can now borrow up to $50,000 a year in the federal direct unsubsidized loan program for students starting a new program after July 1st of 2026. Federal student loans carry fixed interest rates, meaning that the interest rate is not going to change on a specific loan that you take out over the lifetime of that loan. But the interest rates on federal student loans do change for new loans, and they change every academic year. Typically, we are notified in early summer of what the interest rates are going to be for the upcoming academic year. And then along with the changes to the loan programs that were available, all federal student loans for borrowers who take out a new federal student loan after July 1st of 2026 will need to be repaid under two federal repayment programs. We used to have about 8 or 10 different repayment plan options, and those are going down to two, which will be the new tiered standard repayment plan and the income-driven repayment assistance plan. Now, because federal loans exist within that federal ecosystem, they qualify for any of the federal repayment plans, including income-driven repayment options and things like public service loan forgiveness or income-driven repayment forgiveness and things like that. So federal student loans qualify for the federal forgiveness and federal repayment options. Now, if we need additional loan funding above that $50,000 annual limit that we have with federal student loans, we can consider supplementing our federal student loan potentially with a private student loan as well. Now, one word of caution here, if you already know that you are really interested in a career in public service and utilizing public service loan forgiveness, you're going to want to try to limit your private loan borrowing as much as possible, potentially staying within the federal ecosystem 100% if at all possible, so that all of those student loans are eligible for the public service loan forgiveness program. However, if that's not feasible for you, we want to make sure that we're minimizing those private student loans as much as possible, because we're going to need to handle those separately in repayment than our federal student loan. Now, private student loans, this is a whole separate topic that we could really dive really deeply into, but the big things to understand here is that interest rates are going to be offered based on our credit profile. So we may qualify for really, really low interest rates if we've got really good credit and things like a healthy debt to income ratio. Or if our credit's not where we want it to be, or our debt to income ratios are not where we want them to be, then we may get offered really high interest rates on private student loans. The vast majority of professional students, especially full-time professional students that are not going to be working full-time during law school, typically need a cosigner so that they have current income in the picture so that a debt to income ratio can be calculated. So those are some of the big things here. And then again, there's no way to get a private student loan into the federal ecosystem to take advantage of those federal repayment plans or things like public service loan forgiveness. There is no way to get a private student loan into the federal ecosystem. If we borrow a federal student loan and we end up down the line wanting to convert that basically into a private student loan to try to get better interest rates, we can do that through the refinancing process, but there's no equivalent process to get a private student loan into the federal ecosystem, which is why it is typically better to start our borrowing in the federal ecosystem because we've just got more safety nets there, more options, more flexibility for ourselves down the line. If you end up needing to look for a private student loan, we have the AccessLex Private Loan Exchange. This is just meant to be a neutral third-party location where you can compare some of the big national lenders and some of the state-based lenders that are out there. And in the state of Texas, there are some state-based and nonprofit lenders that are absolutely worth looking into for law students, in addition to some of those more traditional bank or credit union offered private student loans. Now, when it comes to our financial aid and figuring out, okay, after my tuition and fees are covered, how much of my financial aid is coming back to me, that is really what is called the refund process. So after our tuition and fees have been covered, any remaining financial aid that we have accepted should be refunded back to us. And when we are making those borrowing decisions about how much we're going to borrow, how much we may apply for in a federal student loan or a private student loan, our decisions on how much we are taking out should be reflecting our actual need, which means we want to sit down and do some budgeting before we accept those loans or before we go out and apply for a private student loan. And there are a couple of key decisions that we need to think through here. The school's cost of attendance, which is what constrains our access to financial aid. It is our total financial aid budget, is designed to cover us for the months that we are actually enrolled in classes, which is typically about 9 out of the 12 calendar months of the year. So when we get our total potential refund for the academic year, realistically, the school is designing that to cover us for 9 months. But we may be signing 12-month leases and we may not have income over the summers. So we may need to, instead of dividing our financial aid refund by 9 months, we might need to think about dividing it by 12 months to make sure that we are covered for the whole calendar year, just in case. But we're going to talk a little bit more about some specific summer financial planning here a little bit later on. And some of those things are going to play into our decision about whether or not to divide our refund into 9 or 12 months. Okay. And then we always want to recalculate what our potential need for our financial refund might be whenever expenses or maybe assumptions change. Maybe halfway through the year, we find out that we're going to have a paid internship over the summer and we're actually going to have some income for the summer. So that might change. If we started in the fall, that might change what our need is for the spring, and we may be able to reduce our student loans for the spring in anticipation of having that income over the summer and things like that. So we always want to be thinking about anytime anything materially changes in our financial picture, how is that going to affect what my need for student loans or need for financial aid is? Now, I mentioned that there are some things that we want to budget for ahead of time. So the earlier on in the process we can start budgeting, the more that is going to set us up for success. We have a couple of different budgeting templates that are available through the Max platform. The first is called the Law Student and Graduate Budget Template. This is an Excel spreadsheet that's got a bunch of different worksheets in it, and it is going to help you both while you're in law school After you have graduated, there's even functionality in here to help you start estimating student loan payments and things like that. So this is an incredibly robust tool. However, when we talk about budgeting, we talk about choosing a tool that you're actually going to use. So if you are not a big fan of Excel and opening an Excel spreadsheet is going to make you want to gouge your eyes out or something like that, then maybe this isn't the right budgeting tool for you. We also have a resource called the Max Spending Plan that's also available for download. That is a PDF that you could either print out and fill out by hand or just download and fill out on your computer. That is going to be another good budgeting template to get you started in the process. There are so many other budgeting tools out there as well. Would encourage you to talk to your colleagues, ask around, see what budgeting tools other people are using, because they may have found a tool that you might like as well. Now, once we've got our budget in place and we know how we're going to be budgeting, we need to think through, okay, I know how I'm planning for these expenses, but realistically, how am I going to pay for them? And that is where our cash flow comes into the picture. So first, we need to understand where our money is coming from. So if we're coming into the process with savings, we might have some savings that are helping cover some of these expenses. Maybe you will be working part-time within whatever the hour constraints are, and you're going to have some part-time income in the picture. Maybe you are receiving a really good scholarship, and maybe the scholarship is covering more than your tuition and fees, so you're going to get a small refund from that scholarship. Or maybe you are borrowing student loans to fill out that remainder of your financial picture. We need to know where this money is coming from. We also need to know how often we're going to receive it. So are you going to get a financial aid disbursement in the fall semester, in the spring semester? Are you going to be in summer classes? Are you going to get a summer financial aid disbursement? We need to know the timings of these things. Okay. Then after we've looked at how much money we have available to us, what our actual expenses are going to be, we've identified our funding gap. How much realistically do we need to take out in order to make sure that our actual funding gap, our actual need is met? Then we're going to receive these financial aid disbursements. So this is when the money actually gets sent to us. And our recommendation here is that when we receive those financial aid disbursements, we put the whole disbursement over in a separate account. That's not our daily checking account. And then we can go ahead and pay ourselves from that account, only drawing what we need each month to cover our monthly expenses. And that way we're turning cash flow realistically that we're only getting two disbursements, maybe three disbursements a year. But now we're able to plan by month because we've got it in a separate account and we're pulling what we need every month. The separate account can be a couple of different things. A high yield savings account or a money market savings account often are going to have higher interest rates for us. So we're able to earn a little bit of interest on that money. Probably not going to be, very high, especially in comparison to what the interest rate on our student loan is, but could still potentially help us out and defray a little bit of that student loan interest cost as well. And then whenever possible, automating required payments or contributions to a saving account whenever possible. Some of those things are going to help take, some of that decision fatigue that we're going to be experiencing kind of out of the picture, and automating some of those things going to help us maybe meet some of the savings goals we might set for ourselves during the law school process. Now, during the 1L year, we really want to pay attention to any of those hidden expenses. And we particularly want to make sure that, especially if we have credit cards in the picture, that we are not using these, as our emergency savings or that credit card creep, which is where, any expenses over our normal monthly budget that we might have, we're just putting those on the credit card and saying that we're going to end up paying that down the line. So what are some of the hidden expenses that come up during law school? So there are things like additional study aids. If you want to pay for, additional study materials or pay for tutoring, things like that. Barrister's Ball and other social events often have some sort of fees associated with them or tickets that you have to buy, organization memberships or dues. Those summer expenses, these are probably one of the biggest ones that come as a surprise to many students. Parking on campus, and then at some point during the law school process, you are going to have to sit for and pass the multi-state professional responsibility exam, and there are costs associated with this as well. Okay, so when we talk about credit card creep, this is what we're talking about. So what if we, found out during the academic year that realistically we're about $100 short every month for our needed expenses, and we could make the decision, okay, maybe we borrow $100 a month more or $1,200 more in that student loan for the year. Or what if we just put that $100 on a credit card? It's just $100 a month. That doesn't sound like that big of a deal. However, over 1 year, that's $1,200 that we put on the credit card with the interest that comes out to about $1,350. If we were to do this over the entire course of law school, that would be $3,600 that we have put on a credit card, and that total interest and principal of that balance would come out to about $5,000 over the law school process, which with that 22% interest rate could take us a little while to be able to pay off. So it may make more sense, instead of putting that on a credit card, to borrow that additional money in a private or a federal student loan where the interest rates may be quite a bit lower than in the 20s, which is where a lot of credit cards are going to end up falling. Now, just outside of the complications of having to repay that credit card debt down the line, credit building during law school also matters for things like the character and fitness portion of the bar. Part of what the character and fitness will be looking for in relation to our finances is any neglect of financial responsibilities. So here they're going to be looking for things like excessive credit card balances where those minimum monthly payments that we have to pay are starting to get unaffordable, and maybe that credit card debt is starting to spiral a little bit out of control for us. So they're going to be looking for things like that, or any student loans that we've gone into default in, things like bankruptcies or foreclosures on a home or other things. So that we don't anticipate a ton of students are going to run into those exact situations during law school, but it is also going to be beneficial for us to learn how to manage our credit, especially if we end up needing to borrow a private student loan or maybe a private bar study loan right at the end of law school, because if we're able to build our credit during the law school process, we may be able to get better interest rates on some of those things. Or if you're thinking about refinancing your loans relatively soon after graduating from law school, having a good credit score at that point in time and practicing healthy credit hygiene, again, going to put you in a much better spot coming out of law school as well. So realistically, what are some steps we can put in place to avoid credit card creep? So one of the big ones would be only charge expenses that you know that you currently have money on hand to cover. One of the easiest ways to build credit is to choose kind of one category of expenses that you're going to put on the credit card that you know that you have money on hand to cover, and you know that you're going to be paying for every month. Paying for gas to fill up our car, that is a really, really good one. Not just because that's an expense that we know and we're already planning for, but there are also a lot of instances of fraud at gas stations and things like that. And credit cards usually have some additional fraud protections built into them that sometimes our debit and checking accounts just don't have. We want to avoid carrying a balance on our credit cards. So what we mean by that is we don't want to have a balance that rolls over from month to month, because that is typically when we get charged interest on that and that balance starts to go up. So again, we want to keep our credit card balances low, and we want to pay them off as we go. Okay. And then use credit for planned expenses, not for budget gaps or emergencies. That is really why we want to have some separate emergency savings, if at all possible. If we're not coming into the process with emergency savings, we want to build that into our budget, into our spending plan early, so that we've got some cash on hand to help cover some of these things. And then remember, like we talked about earlier, sometimes additional student loans may be the lesser of two evils when the other evil or the other choice would be putting it on a credit card. If building credit or credit concepts are newer to you, we have the Foundations of Credit Guidebook. This is a free download through Max. This is going to walk you through the credit systems within the United States and help you understand how to build credit and practice healthy credit hygiene within the US credit system. Effective credit management, there's a couple of things that we want to do regularly to make sure we are keeping track of our credit. The first is to pull our credit reports fairly often. At least once every 6 months is kind of the industry recommendation. We can pull a free credit report from each of the 3 credit bureaus here at annualcreditreport.com. We can actually do that up to once a week. This was additional flexibility that was granted to us during the COVID pandemic. And so we actually now have more access to our credit reports than we ever have before historically. We used to only be able to do this once a year. Now we can pull them up to once a week, but realistically, at least once every 6 months. It's going to be a good way to make sure that we are keeping track of what's going on our credit reports. We also, in general, want to have a rough idea of what our credit score is. You can find that at myfico.com. There are plenty of other ways to track your credit score as well. If you have a credit card, chances are your credit card company offers some sort of credit score tracking. There are also companies like Credit Karma or Credit Sesame that offer free credit tracking as well. Again, these companies will be using a specific version of a FICO or a VantageScore credit score model. So your credit score can look different based on the model that's being used. But in general, most of the models are going to provide scores that are relatively similar. So using a tool like that is going to give you a rough idea of what your credit score is. It's going to get you close enough that you're going to be able to use that for your own planning and things like that. Okay. All right, so now that we've talked about some of the strategies we needed to know coming into the process, some of the things we want to keep an eye on during the 1L year, let's talk about some forward-facing things, some things that are going to come up either towards the end of 1L year or starting to think about the remainder of the law school process. So we've talked about the summer a couple of times already. Here are some of the big scenarios you may run into. You may be offered some sort of unpaid internship or externship for the summer. This is particularly common for those thinking about a career in public service. It's going to be great experience, but you're not getting paid for that. So you're going to have limited cash flow. This is, again, probably a scenario where budgeting our financial aid refund over 12 months rather than 9 months is going to set us up for success. So stretching our funding to plan for those summer expenses. The earlier we do that in the academic year, the more financial flexibility we're going to have. Now, what if we get a paid job over the summer? It's awesome. It's helpful to have that income, but having that income, especially after 9 months of living on financial aid, does potentially come with the temptation to overspend. So we want to make sure that we are making sure that we're covered for our summer expenses. But if we're going to make a little bit of extra money, we want to think about how that may benefit the rest of our law school journey. So that may be able to go into savings. We may be able to build that emergency savings account or beef it up so that we're ready for anything that comes up in 2L and 3L year. Or we might be able to put that towards some of maybe our bar expense costs that are going to come at the end of law school. Now, what if you get a high-paying job, but it comes with relocation or extra costs? Maybe it's not going to allow you to stay in the same apartment that you leased for law school, so you're going to have to pay for a separate place to rent or an Airbnb for an extended period of time over the summer. May come with a bigger paycheck, but there may be some bigger hidden expenses. Very similar to the previous scenario, though, we just want to estimate what we're actually going to be able to keep after the process. So we want to make sure we've planned through all those expenses and understand how much money we're going to have available at the end to, again, put maybe towards some additional savings or future law school needs. Okay. Talked about some bar expenses a few times. Realistically, what are those going to be? We have to pay to register for the bar exam. This can be included in our 3L cost of attendance, so the bar exam fee itself. However, if we need to travel to wherever we're going to be sitting for the bar, those are expenses we would need to plan to have saved, or we would potentially need to borrow in additional student loan funding. There's often also a bar prep course that we are going to be using. These can vary pretty widely in price from about $1,200 all the way up to $3,500 or approaching $4,000, just depending on the company and tier of bar prep program we go with. And then lastly, we also need to plan for our living expenses. Some may be able to work while studying for the bar. Your future employer may give you the option to do that. But oftentimes, schools and employers really want us focusing as much as possible on studying for the bar so that we can pass that exam the first time around. So that you may be encouraged to not work during this time. So you may need to be prepared to cover your living expenses during the 2 to 3 months that you'll be studying for the bar, sitting for the bar before you may have started work and have that income in place. Okay. So, what can you do to plan for these now? Have a dedicated savings account for bar exam savings, or if you have, a savings account that allows you to have different savings buckets, have a dedicated savings bucket for bar exam costs. Set aside even as small of an amount of $50 to $100 a month to get you started saving for those bar exam expenses. Also, as you are job hunting, explore employer bar stipends or maybe scholarship opportunities through the Access Lux Law School Scholarship Databank. And then we also have a bar exam budget spreadsheet that can help you get ready and plan for those bar exam expenses. That should be included in that law student and graduate budget template, that Excel template that we talked about a little bit earlier. Okay. So to recap, some key strategies for 1Ls that are going to help reduce your financial stress during 1L year and set you up for financial success moving into the rest of law school. So first, identifying our real costs and identifying what our actual funding gap is going to be. That's going to allow us to make informed financial aid decisions in terms of how much federal student loan funding to accept, or maybe how much in private student loan funding we have to apply for. Then we're going to get our bank account set up. We're going to have that separate savings account that we are keeping our refunds in and then paying ourselves out of. We want to think through and uncover any of the hidden expenses that we might run into. So thinking about things again, like the barrister's ball, like tutoring and other expenses, we want to think about those early and plan for those. We want to avoid credit card creep and practice healthy credit hygiene by keeping our balances low and paying off our credit cards as we go. We want to think about what our potential situation for 1L summer is going to be and plan for that well ahead of time, whether that is pursuing a job that's going to pay over the summer or spreading our financial aid out over 12 months rather than 9. We want to think about bar exam costs early and start saving for those as soon as possible. And then starting to think about our 2L situation again towards the tail end of 1L year, or maybe even over that 1L summer as well, really starting to think ahead and plan for that summer. Okay. Now, you have support through all of these decisions, through 1L year, actually all the way through 3L year through Max Coaching. Max Coaching is free one-on-one coaching with accredited financial counselors. and it is unlimited within reason. So make use of these appointments. We love talking to students about their finances and help them figure out a personalized plan for how they're going to fund the law school process and help you to start thinking about if student loans are in that picture, help you think about how we're going to repay and manage those after law school as soon as possible. Okay. Now, I mentioned at the top that Max by Access Lex is the personal finance program for law students. And as a part of this program, you have the ability to earn scholarship entries into the Max scholarship drawings. And we even give you the chance for some bonus entries. So if you want to earn some entries into those drawings and earn those bonus entries as a 1L, you would need to complete the 1L course in Max, which is called Financial Foundations. There are 8 lessons in here, a pre-assessment, a post-assessment, and 6 educational modules. You want to attend the Building Your Law School Budget webinar and get the code that's given to you at the end of that session, and Financial Strategies for 1Ls and get the code at the end of that session. Now, this is the session that we are doing today. So you are going to get a code for the session here in the next couple of slides. So we've already knocked out one of these. You would just need to figure out attending Building Your Law School Budget and knocking out those lessons, and you are well on your way to getting those bonus entries. We have 4 different scholarship drawing dates throughout the year. November and February 1st, we're drawing $5,000 scholarships. We do 6 of those, 2 per L year. On April 1st, these are our grand prize drawings. And if you earn those 10 bonus entries, those 10 bonus entries are going to apply to this drawing. And that's great because this is our biggest scholarship drawing of the year. We draw 6 $25,000 scholarships, 2 per L year, and 3 $40,000 scholarships, 1 per L year here. And then this May 1st drawing, this is for 1Ls only. You do have to complete that full 1L course and attend those 2 recommended 1L webinars in order to be entered for this May 1st drawing. But this is a drawing for one $50,000 scholarship. This is the Hannah R. Arterian Memorial Scholarship drawing for 1Ls only. And again, just a reminder, you do have to complete the full 1L course and attend those 2 recommended 1L webinars in order to be entered to this drawing. All the other ones, as long as you've done 1 lesson or attended 1 webinar, you are entered into all the other drawings. Now, you can earn up to, I believe we have over 30 different webinar topics that we cover, which means that that is the potential to earn about 30 different scholarship entries by attending webinars each academic year. So would recommend bookmarking our webinar schedule and checking back often to see if there is a webinar that you're interested in attending and earning that additional scholarship entry. Additionally, if you're ever wondering how many entries you have, you can check the number of entries, aka badges that you have earned through the gamification tab, which you can access by logging into askedna.org, navigating over to Max by Access Lex. In the top right-hand corner, you are going to see your initials. You're going to go ahead and click on that, and then my gamification is going to be a couple of options down on that list. And the number of badges that are listed there, that is the number of scholarship entries that you have so far for that academic year. Our scholarship drawings function just like a raffle. The more entries you have, more of chances you have to win. And the scholarship code for today is stipend. And you can either follow the steps on the screen to get to where you need to enter this code. You can scan the QR code here as well. If you're in the 1L Financial Foundations course, the direct link to enter the code for Financial Strategies for 1Ls is going to be listed there as well. So a few different ways that you can get there, but that is the information that we had for you today. If you have any follow-up questions, please make sure to schedule a Max coaching call with one of us here at Access Lex, and we would be so happy to meet with you and talk you through any of the financial things that you're considering as part of your law school journey. Wish you the best of luck with your 1L year. And again, we are here to be a resource if you run into any issues or if you have any questions. Okay. Thank you so much for your attention today. Hope you have a great rest of your day. Thank you so much for being here.